In a blinding South Dakota snowstorm, an old German shepherd refused to leave a woman collapsed outside a locked motel. The building had been closed for 3 years, but Alder still guarded its door as if someone might need it to open. When former Navy SEAL Malcolm Reed followed the dog's tracks through the snow, he thought he was saving one life. Instead, he uncovered a system that moved vulnerable people away and often stopped asking where they ended up. To protect them, Malcolm would have to reopen a place the town had abandoned and face the weakness he had spent years hiding. Because sometimes loyalty is not waiting for someone to return. It is keeping watch until someone else accepts the duty. Tell us where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers and keep these stories coming. Winter had a way of making South Dakota look innocent. After snow, the hills north of Sunbreak Ridge became pale and clean beneath a sky so blue it seemed newly painted. Fences disappeared into white fields. The dark shoulders of the Black Hills rose in the west like sleeping animals. When sunlight came, the snow glittered hard enough to hurt the eyes. Malcolm Reed had stopped mistaking beauty for kindness. At 54, he lived alone in a timber cabin halfway up a ridge where the road narrowed, turned twice, and became nobody's responsibility but his. The cabin was sturdy because Malcolm had repaired nearly every part of it himself. The porch leaned less than it used to. The chimney no longer smoked backward in an east wind. The kitchen window had been sealed so well that not even a moth could find its way through. There was one chair at the table he never moved. It had belonged to his former wife, though nothing else in the room did anymore. The photographs had been packed away. Her blue ceramic bowl had broken one winter when Malcolm dropped it, and he had stared at the pieces for nearly an hour before sweeping them into the trash. The chair remained because removing it would have required admitting that emptiness could be arranged. That afternoon, the wind struck the cabin in long, blunt waves. Malcolm stood near the mudroom mirror, trying to fasten the cuff of his field jacket. His right hand trembled. Not dramatically. It never gave him the dignity of drama. It was only a small betrayal in the fingers, a hesitation between thought and movement. The button slipped once, twice, then dropped from his grip. Malcolm closed his eyes. Years earlier, during active service, he had been the man others trusted with precise work in bad conditions. He could read terrain in darkness, stabilize an injured teammate under fire, repair equipment with numb hands. Then a training accident had damaged his spine and right shoulder, and the military had given him an honorable medical retirement, a folder of instructions, and enough official sympathy to make him feel as if he had already become a memorial. His marriage had lasted less than 2 years after that. The injury had not destroyed it by itself. Pain had merely given Malcolm a language for pushing everyone away. He rejected physical therapy when progress came slowly. He slept on the couch because he did not want anyone hearing him wake from nightmares. When his wife offered help, he heard pity. When she asked him to speak, he heard accusation. By the time she left, they had both become experts at being quiet in the same room. Malcolm abandoned the button and pulled the jacket closed without fastening it. "Good enough," he told the empty house. The house did not argue, which was one reason he preferred it. He needed heating fuel, batteries, and the prescription waiting at the pharmacy in town. The weather report said the worst of the storm would arrive after sundown. Malcolm believed weather reports in the same way he believed politicians, useful only when confirmed by what the sky was already doing. The sky was doing worse. He drove down the ridge in an old dark green pickup with a dent above the left rear wheel and a heater that worked only when it felt respected. Snow moved sideways across the windshield. The road vanished and returned beneath the headlights in brief gray strips. Sunbreak Ridge was quieter than usual. The feed store had closed early. The diner's open sign glowed behind a curtain of snow, though no cars sat outside. Malcolm collected his supplies, exchanged as few words as possible, and started back before the storm could decide he belonged in town. He was several miles north of the last gas station when he noticed the tracks. They crossed the shoulder from the east, large and uneven, already filling with snow. Dog tracks. The stride was too long for a coyote, but one rear foot dragged slightly, cutting a shallow groove between prints. Malcolm slowed. The tracks ran beside the highway for perhaps 50 yards, then turned toward an old access road nearly buried beneath drifts. He knew where it led. North Star Motor Lodge had been closed for 3 years. Once it had served truckers, seasonal workers, hunters, and veterans, crossing the state with more mileage than money. Its silver star sign still stood above the entrance, though one point had broken off and the metal frame tilted toward the road. The place was supposed to be empty. Malcolm continued driving for another 20 seconds. Then he swore, braked, and backed the truck toward the access road. He told himself he was checking for an injured animal. Nothing more. He would look, call county dispatch if necessary, and go home before the road disappeared completely. The pickup pushed through snow until the motel emerged from the storm. North Star looked smaller than Malcolm remembered. A row of low rooms curved around a central office with broad front windows. Snow had piled against the doors. The old vacancy sign hung dead above the awning. Beyond the building, the silver star groaned softly on its rusted pole. The dog tracks led to the office. Malcolm parked with the headlights aimed at the entrance. For a moment, he saw nothing but snow spinning in the beams. Then the mound beside the door moved. It lifted its head. The German shepherd was large even in starvation. His frame was long, his chest deep, his black saddle broad across a yellow-gray coat, now crusted with ice. Most of his muzzle had gone silver. One ear stood upright, the left bent slightly near the tip, marked by an old crescent-shaped notch. His amber eyes fixed on Malcolm. The dog did not rise. He was lying over something. Malcolm stepped from the truck, and the wind struck him so hard that pain flashed beneath his right shoulder blade. He pulled his collar up and approached slowly, boots sinking to the ankle. "Easy," he said. The shepherd lowered his head and gave a warning growl. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Malcolm stopped 10 feet away. The shape beneath the dog was wrapped in a dark teal coat and a brick-red scarf. A gloved hand lay partly exposed in the snow. A woman. "Can she hear me?" Malcolm asked, though he knew the dog could not answer. The shepherd shifted his body, covering more of her. That movement cost him. His rear legs trembled. His ribs showed through the wet fur when he breathed. Malcolm understood something then that had nothing to do with animal handling. The dog was not guarding territory. He was spending the last of himself. Malcolm crouched, ignoring the pull in his spine. "I'm not taking her away from you." The dog's eyes remained fixed on his face. "I'm taking both of you." The shepherd growled again, but weaker this time. Malcolm removed one glove and placed his bare hand flat on the snow between them. The cold bit immediately. "No tricks," he said. "You can watch everything." The dog's nose moved. For several seconds, neither of them advanced. Then the woman coughed beneath him. It was a thin, broken sound, almost swallowed by the storm. The shepherd turned his head toward her so quickly that the motion made him sway. He nudged the red scarf, then looked back at Malcolm. Something changed in the dog's eyes. Not trust, permission. Malcolm moved. The woman was small, perhaps in her late 70s. Her white hair, cut in a short bob, had frozen against one cheek. Her skin was pale beneath windburn, her lips bluish. A dead phone lay near her hand. The office door behind her had a new steel lock. Snow and ice had sealed the service passage along the side of the building. Malcolm touched 2 fingers to the woman's neck. Her pulse was weak but present. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyelids moved. "Alder," she whispered. The dog pressed his muzzle to her face. So that was his name. Malcolm hurried back to the truck and returned with an emergency blanket, an old wool cover, and a tarp. He wrapped the woman first, working carefully around Alder, who watched every movement. When Malcolm tried to lift her, the shepherd struggled to stand. His rear legs folded. For one brief moment, the great dog looked startled, as though his own body had violated an agreement. Malcolm felt the sight somewhere beneath his ribs. He had known that expression. He had worn it the first time his hand failed to close around a coffee mug. Alder tried again. "Don't," Malcolm said softly. "You've done enough." The dog stared at him with an anger that looked almost human. "No," Malcolm corrected. "More than enough." He carried the woman to the truck's rear seat, wrapped her in the emergency blanket, and started the engine to build heat. Alder remained near the office door. Malcolm opened the passenger side and waited. The shepherd did not move. Snow collected along his back. Malcolm looked at the woman. Her eyes had opened slightly. "He won't leave?" she breathed. "Then tell him you are." Her gaze shifted toward the open door. "Alder!" The dog's ears lifted. "Come with me." Only then did he step away from North Star. He crossed the snow slowly, each movement stiff with age and exhaustion. Malcolm supported his chest when he climbed into the truck, though Alder tolerated the touch with visible reluctance. The shepherd settled awkwardly on the floor behind the passenger seat, his head near the woman's hand. As Malcolm turned the truck toward the ridge, Alder kept his eyes on her face. He did not look back at the motel. At the cabin, Malcolm called the only physician he knew who still answered her own phone during storms. "Doctor?" Helena Merritt arrived 40 minutes later in a tracked rescue vehicle driven by Graham Vickery, a volunteer emergency responder whose orange knit cap appeared before the rest of him through the blowing snow. Helena entered, carrying a red medical bag and the calm authority of someone accustomed to finding bad situations before they had decided what kind of tragedy to become. She was 52, broad-shouldered beneath a dark red parka, with brown skin, amber brown eyes, and black hair threaded with silver, tied low at her neck. She took in Malcolm, the woman, and the dog in one glance. "Start with the patient," Malcolm said. "I generally do." Her voice was dry, but not unkind. The woman's name was Beatrice Kellen. Helena found identification in her coat and confirmed it when Beatrice briefly regained awareness. She was hypothermic, dehydrated, feverish, and showing early signs of pneumonia. Her oxygen level was low enough to worry Helena, but not yet beyond stabilization. Graham brought in a portable oxygen tank and warmed fluids, while Malcolm fed wood into the stove. "What was she doing out there?" Graham asked. Malcolm looked toward Alder. The old shepherd lay beside the temporary bed, his body curved around its edge. He had refused water and meat broth. "Waiting," Malcolm said. Helena glanced at him but did not ask what he meant. When the county plow finally opened the lower road, Graham prepared to take Beatrice to the hospital for imaging and overnight observation. As the stretcher moved toward the door, Alder rose. His legs shook. "You can't come," Helena told him gently. "Not tonight." Alder placed himself between the stretcher and the doorway. Malcolm expected a growl. Instead, the dog simply stood there, trembling, his eyes fixed on Beatrice. Helena removed one glove, took out her phone, and called the hospital transport team after they loaded Beatrice into the rescue vehicle. A nurse held the phone near Beatrice's bed. Her voice came through faintly. "Alder?" The shepherd's ears rose. "You stay with Malcolm." Alder stared at the phone. Beatrice coughed, then added, "That is an order, you stubborn old man." Graham looked away to hide a smile. Alder slowly lowered himself onto the floor. Only after the rescue vehicle disappeared down the ridge did he drink. Much later, Malcolm sat beside the stove while the storm weakened outside. Alder lay in front of the empty bed where Beatrice had been treated, his head resting on his paws. Malcolm had always understood loyalty as endurance. Hold position. Complete the task. Do not make your pain another person's burden. Alder had shown him something different. The dog had not stayed outside because he had been commanded to suffer. He had stayed because Beatrice could not leave. In Alder's world, strength did not mean needing no one. It meant refusing to abandon the one who did. Near dawn, the clouds broke apart. Malcolm stepped onto the porch with a cup held in his left hand. The air had gone still. Fresh snow covered the ridge in blue-white light. Below the cabin, near the bend in the road, tire tracks interrupted the untouched surface. They belonged to a large SUV. The vehicle had climbed far enough to see the cabin, stopped, then reversed back down the hill. Malcolm followed the tracks with his eyes until they vanished among the pines. Behind him, Alder had risen without a sound. The old shepherd stood in the doorway, looking down the same road. Someone had come to see whether Beatrice Kellen had survived the storm. Whoever it was had not come to help. Beatrice Kellen returned to Malcolm's cabin the next afternoon with a paper hospital bracelet still around her wrist and the expression of a woman who considered recovery an administrative inconvenience. Dr. Helena Merritt brought her up the hill in Graham Vickery's tracked rescue vehicle. Graham carried the oxygen case inside, though Beatrice insisted she no longer needed it. Helena ignored the protest, checked the cabin stove, counted the stairs between the bed and the bathroom, then handed Malcolm a page of instructions. "Antibiotics twice a day," she said. "Fluids, food before the pills, no walking outside alone." Beatrice removed her coat as though none of this concerned her. "And if she becomes short of breath, confused, or starts shaking again, you call me," Helena continued. "I was confused long before the pneumonia," Beatrice said. No one seemed particularly alarmed then. Graham coughed into his fist to hide a laugh. Helena did not smile. She had known Beatrice too long to reward every attempt at mutiny. "You spent a night in the hospital because your oxygen level was low and your lungs sounded like wet paper," she said. "You may joke after you finish the medicine." "I can do both." "Not under my supervision." Beatrice looked toward Malcolm. "Is she always like this?" "Yes," he said. Helena gave him a glance that suggested he had chosen the correct answer for once. Alder stood beside the bed throughout the exchange. He had eaten half a bowl of softened food that morning, but only after Malcolm played the voicemail Helena had recorded at the hospital. "Alder, this is Beatrice. You stay there. I am coming back." The old shepherd had listened without moving. When the message ended, he looked at the phone, then at Malcolm, as if evaluating whether the machine was a reliable witness. Now Beatrice lowered herself onto the edge of the bed and placed one hand against Alder's silvered muzzle. "You look worse than I do," she murmured. Alder leaned his weight into her knee. "That is not a compliment." His tail moved once against the floor. Malcolm turned away before either of them noticed how much relief that small sound carried. Helena stayed long enough to check Beatrice's temperature and examine Alder's breathing. The dog had no fever, but dehydration and age had left him weak. His rear joints were stiff, and the skin beneath his collar showed irritation from neglect. "He needs a proper veterinary exam," Helena said. "I know someone in Rapid City," Malcolm replied. Beatrice shook her head. "Too far in this weather. Call Ruth Bellamy in town. She treats ranch dogs, retired police dogs, stubborn men, and once a goat that ate a wedding veil." Malcolm looked at Helena. "The goat survived," Helena said. "The marriage did not," Beatrice added. This time even Helena smiled. When they were finally alone, the cabin seemed smaller. Beatrice occupied the old chair beside the stove. Alder lay at her feet, Malcolm stood at the counter, cutting bread and trying not to look like a man who had suddenly acquired both a patient and a guest. He had spent years arranging his life so that nothing required negotiation. One cup, one plate, one set of tracks between the bed, stove, and porch. Now there was an extra coat hanging in the mudroom, medicine beside the sink, a bowl of water near the stove, and a woman who had already moved his sugar jar because she claimed it was in a foolish place. Malcolm placed a bowl of soup before her. Beatrice inspected it. "What? You cook like a man who believes seasoning is a moral weakness. You're free to recover elsewhere." "No, I'm not." She said it lightly, but the room changed. Malcolm sat across from her. Beatrice lifted the spoon, took 2 careful mouthfuls, then rested it against the bowl. Her hands were steady, though fatigue had hollowed the skin beneath her eyes. "North Star was never elegant," she began. Even when it was new, the pipes complained, the curtains faded unevenly, and the ice machine made a noise like a mule dying in church. Malcolm waited. Arthur loved it. Her husband's name entered the room without ceremony. Beatrice did not lower her voice or look away. That made the grief feel older and more permanent. "Arthur Kellen was Army logistics," she continued. 26 years. He could move fuel, blankets, spare parts, and 50 hungry men through a mountain pass with 3 trucks and 1 bad map. But ask him to remember where he left his glasses, and civilization collapsed. Alder opened one eye at the sound of Arthur's name. Beatrice noticed. "He brought Alder home when the dog was 2. Said a motel on a winter highway needed someone who could hear trouble before it knocked." "What happened to Arthur?" "Heart failure, quick enough that he did not have time to complain about it." The sentence was dry. Her thumb moved once over the handle of the spoon. Malcolm knew better than to offer comfort shaped like a question. Beatrice continued. North Star had once been a cheap stop for truckers, refinery crews, traveling nurses, hunters, seasonal laborers, and veterans crossing the state between jobs, hospitals, families, or no destination at all. Arthur kept 3 rooms unlisted during winter. If someone arrived after midnight with no money, he gave them a key and told them breakfast cost extra. "It did not," Beatrice said. "He just thought charity embarrassed people less when it came with an invoice." Malcolm looked toward Alder. The old dog's front paws were crossed neatly, though one bore a black ring of fur above the wrist like a narrow band. "When Arthur died, the business was already struggling," Beatrice said. The interstate traffic shifted. Hunters wanted lodges with fireplaces and heated stone floors. People stopped wanting rooms where the lamps buzzed and the shower took 5 minutes to forgive you. She sold furniture, closed half the rooms, borrowed against the property. Then came unpaid taxes, roof damage, frozen pipes, and an offer from a development company. "The contract was not a sale," she said. "Not yet. A purchase option. They can complete it only if the property is vacant, non-operational, and no longer serving a public or community use." "So they need it empty." "They need it to look empty." Malcolm leaned back. There it was. Not a secret exactly, more like a door opening onto the shape of the problem. Beatrice explained that she still held title to North Star. The developer had paid part of her tax debt in exchange for the option. She could not afford full repairs, but she had never surrendered the property. During cold spells, she sometimes opened 3 rooms in the south wing. For people passing through? For people no one wanted to count. She listed them without self-pity: widowers sleeping in cars, older veterans waiting for disability decisions, women who had left dangerous homes too late in life to start over easily, men released from hospitals with nowhere warm to recover. How did they find you? People talk. Bakers know. Gas station clerks know. Church secretaries know everything. Malcolm looked toward the window. Snow slid from the roof in a soft collapse. "And Alder, Beatrice's face softened. After Arthur died, a couple outside Spearfish took Alder. He stayed 11 days, chewed through a screen, and returned to North Star. A retired deputy tried next. Alder lasted 3 weeks before disappearing during a thunderstorm. He came back to the laundry room, Beatrice said. Wet, hungry, pleased with himself. For the first 2 years, Beatrice still visited daily. She slept there sometimes. The gas station owner left food by the maintenance gate. A cook from the diner brought bones and scraps. Then Sentinel Range Security installed fencing and posted private property notices on behalf of the development company. They padlocked the office, shut off the outdoor taps, and warned people that feeding Alder encouraged a dangerous stray. He was not a stray, Beatrice said. Alder raised his head. No, Malcolm agreed. He wasn't. Beatrice studied him for a moment, then finished another spoonful of soup. The winter ledger came later. At first, she kept names on loose reservation cards. Then too many people arrived with medication schedules, family numbers, hearing problems, memory trouble, or instructions that mattered in an emergency. So she bought a dark blue ledger with metal corners and began recording what official forms often failed to hold. Name, age, medication, emergency contact, where the person planned to go, whether they had eaten, whether they were afraid of locked doors, whether they needed to be addressed as Mr., Miss, Sergeant, Doctor, Reverend, or simply by their first name. One man wrote that himself, Beatrice said. Do not call me patient. He had spent 9 months in a rehabilitation ward where everyone talked over him as if the bed had replaced the man. Malcolm's right hand tightened around his coffee cup. Beatrice noticed the tremor but did not look directly at it. Instead, she said, Systems begin by shortening people. Name becomes case. Home becomes placement. Fear becomes noncompliance. Pain becomes behavior. The cup clicked softly against the saucer. Malcolm set it down. You think that's what happened here? I know people were taken. Taken or transported? That is the word they use when they want the direction to matter more than the consent. She described the winter outreach teams. Iron Crest Recovery Center had a county contract to assess vulnerable adults during severe weather. Their vans arrived with heated seats, blankets, medical forms, and polite staff. Sentinel Range Security accompanied them at North Star. The security uniforms were dark gray, with shoulder patches and utility belts. In poor light, especially to frightened older people, they looked close enough to law enforcement. Some residents accepted transport willingly. Others were told the motel was condemned, and they could either board the van or face trespassing charges. They were sick, Beatrice said. Cold. Some had no glasses. They signed whatever was put in front of them. And where were they taken? Iron Crest first. After that, no one would tell me. She had called, written letters, driven to the facility once. Privacy rules were cited, then property violations, then concern over her judgment. A county contractor suggested she undergo a cognitive assessment. Malcolm's expression hardened. They called you incompetent. They implied it in language expensive enough to sound compassionate. The developer behind the resort project was Thaddeus Crowell. Malcolm knew the name. Everyone around Sunbreak Ridge did. Crowell appeared at council meetings in clean wool coats and spoke about job creation, hunting tourism, infrastructure, and reversing rural decline. Crown Elk Reserve promised cabins, guided expeditions, a dining lodge, and tax revenue the town badly needed. The proposed access road crossed the North Star parcel. He is not stupid enough to say he wants old homeless people gone, Beatrice said. He says they deserve appropriate care. He says unsafe properties must be cleared. He says relocation is humane. Maybe some of it is. Of course some of it is. The most dangerous arguments usually contain something true. That answer irritated Malcolm more than certainty would have. He rose and carried his cup to the sink. "Call Adult Protective Services," he said. "Call the county. Call your attorney." I did. Then call again. I did that too. There are procedures. Beatrice watched him rinse a cup that was already clean. "Procedures gave you retirement papers," she said. Malcolm stopped. "They also gave you a list of clinics, phone numbers, benefits, and instructions. Did any of them teach you how to wake up inside a life that no longer recognized you?" He turned. "That is not the same thing. No, it is only similar enough to make you angry." Alder lifted his head, alert to the change in their voices. Malcolm's right shoulder had tightened. Pain traveled down his arm in a familiar hot line. Beatrice did not soften her gaze. "You believe people with forms and seals always beat people with memories," she said. "Perhaps they often do. But memory is where you begin, when no one bothered to keep the right record. You want me to fight a development company, a medical contractor, and a county office because you have a notebook? No." She reached into the inside pocket of her teal coat, which hung over the chair. From it she removed a ring of old brass keys. There were 8 in all. Room keys, office keys, one long steel key with rust along the teeth. A small brass star hung from the ring, its surface worn smooth. Beatrice set the keys on the table. Alder rose. The sound seemed to reach him from another life. He crossed the room slowly and stood beside the table, looking at the keys but not touching them. Beatrice placed her palm over them. "I do not need you to save the motel," she said. "Buildings are wood, wire, and debt. Arthur knew that." "Then what do you want?" "I want to know where 4 people went." Malcolm looked at the key ring. Beatrice named them: Leona Briggs, Milton Graves, Caleb Rourke, Etta Vale. Each name was spoken slowly, without performance. They did not sound like clues. They sounded like people expected for supper. "They were in the ledger," she said. "They were transported. None of the numbers I have for them still work. No family has called back. No facility will confirm where they are." "And the ledger?" "Still at North Star, hidden where Arthur kept emergency cash." Malcolm felt an immediate resistance. Breaking into a locked property, even one Beatrice still owned, would create exactly the kind of story Crowell wanted. An injured former serviceman, an elderly woman, an abandoned building, a dispute over land. "No," he said. Beatrice nodded once. The lack of argument unsettled him. "You understand?" "I understand that you have not said yes." She pushed the keys toward him. "I also understand that you have not asked me to take them back." Malcolm looked down. His right hand rested near the edge of the table. The fingers trembled faintly. Beatrice's eyes followed the movement, but there was no pity in them, only recognition. "We are both very practiced," she said, "at pretending not to need anyone. It makes weakness harder for other people to use against us." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "It also makes us easy to leave alone." The room remained quiet. Alder lowered his head and nudged the brass star once with his nose. Malcolm closed his hand around the keys. Not agreement, not yet, but not refusal either. That evening, Beatrice slept in the bed beside the stove. Alder lay on the rug between her and the door. Malcolm sat at the kitchen table with the brass keys beside his left hand. He wrote the 4 names on the back of an old utility envelope: Leona Briggs, Milton Graves, Caleb Rourke, Etta Vale. The names looked ordinary in his handwriting. That made them harder to dismiss. Near midnight, a soft scrape came from the porch. Alder woke instantly. The old shepherd rose without barking and moved toward the front door. Malcolm stood as well, reaching for the flashlight near the stove. A branch dragged across the porch railing. Nothing more. But Alder did not return to his place beside Beatrice. Instead, he turned sideways across the narrow space between the kitchen and the door. His body blocked the path to the bed. It also blocked the path to Malcolm. The dog looked from one of them to the other, then settled across the threshold as if he had redrawn the boundaries of his duty. Malcolm stared down at him. Alder was no longer guarding only the woman who had survived the snow. Somewhere between the motel and the cabin, the old dog had decided Malcolm belonged inside the circle too. Malcolm agreed the next morning, though he made it sound like a warning. "We do this legally," he told Beatrice. "No cutting locks, no walking into North Star because your name is still on an old deed. No accusing people in public before we know what happened." Beatrice sat at the cabin table with a blanket around her shoulders and the winter medicine lined beside her tea. She looked healthier than she had in the snow, but illness still stole small pieces of her strength. Every few minutes she paused to breathe before speaking again. "I am 78, she said. "I have discovered that the law is often less interested in what is right than in whether I filled out the proper page." "Then we fill out the page." Alder lay beneath the table, one silvered muzzle resting across Malcolm's boot. The dog had begun eating regularly, though he still watched Beatrice between every few bites as if nourishment were acceptable only after attendance had been confirmed. Malcolm placed the 4 names from the utility envelope on the table: Leona Briggs, Milton Graves, Caleb Rourke, Etta Vale. "We verify them one at a time," he said. "We find out whether they consented to transport, where they were admitted, and where they went afterward." Beatrice considered the list. That almost sounded hopeful. It was procedural. In some men, those are the same thing. Helena Merritt made the first official call. She contacted Marion Greeley, an investigator with the state's Adult Protective Services Office. Marion drove to Sunbreak Ridge 2 days later in a compact state vehicle that looked too clean for the Ridge Road and arrived carrying a waterproof case, a purple-gray coat, and no visible desire to make anyone comfortable. She was 58, short and solidly built, with close-cropped black hair silvering at the temples. Reading glasses rested on top of her head, though she seemed capable of seeing through most people without them. Her voice was calm, clipped, and difficult to interrupt. She interviewed Beatrice at the kitchen table. Malcolm remained near the stove. Helena sat beside Beatrice, not to speak for her, but to make certain fatigue did not turn the interview into another form of pressure. Marion began with North Star's condition. "Were the rooms inspected?" "No," Beatrice said. "Working smoke detectors?" "Not in every room." "Functional heating?" "Portable heaters in the south wing." "Emergency exits marked?" I knew where they were. "That was not my question." Beatrice's eyes narrowed. Malcolm expected her to become defensive. Instead, she folded her hands. "No," she said. "They were not properly marked." Marion wrote it down. "You understand that allowing medically vulnerable adults into an uninspected building could have killed someone. So could leaving them in their cars. Both can be true." The sentence landed without cruelty. That was when Malcolm began to trust Marion, not because she believed Beatrice, but because she refused to improve the facts for either side. Marion reviewed the 4 names, then the dates Beatrice had recorded. She requested the transport numbers from the county emergency weather program and explained what she could and could not legally obtain. "I cannot call a medical facility and demand private records because a friend is worried," she said. "I can determine whether the county has proof that each transport ended at a receiving location. If there is no confirmation, I can open a welfare review." "And if the forms say they went willingly?" Malcolm asked. "Then I ask what willingly looked like. Did they understand? Could they read the paperwork? Were they threatened with arrest? Were they medically stable enough to choose?" Beatrice slid the list toward her. Marion did not take it immediately. "Before I do this, you need to hear something," she said. North Star cannot reopen as it was. Good intentions do not make unsafe wiring safe. If I find people were harmed by the transport program, that does not make your motel automatically fit for shelter. Beatrice's mouth tightened. Then she nodded. "Fair?" Marion took the paper. Deputy Sheriff Corbin Shaw arrived that afternoon. He came in a brown department parka, snow melting from his shoulders, a radio clipped high on the left. At 46, he had a compact, disciplined build, a short crew cut already graying above the ears, and a neat brown-ash mustache that made him look more old-fashioned than he probably intended. A thin scar interrupted his left eyebrow. He removed his hat before entering, but his gaze stayed on Malcolm. "I heard you were back," Corbin said. "I never lived far enough away to count as gone." Corbin glanced at the brass keys on the table. "Crowell's attorney says you may be planning to enter restricted property." "Crowell's attorney seems well informed." "Are you?" "No." The answer came fast enough to irritate them both. Beatrice explained the names. Marion described the missing receiving confirmations. Corbin listened, arms folded, his expression hardening only slightly. He had signed 2 of the old clearance reports. He did not deny it. North Star was unsafe, he said. Temperatures were below 0. Iron Crest had heated vans and open beds. "Did you watch anyone arrive there?" Malcolm asked. "No." "Did you call afterward?" "No." "Then you watched them get into a van." Corbin's jaw moved beneath the mustache. "I followed the county plan. Plans do not keep people warm after the van leaves. And suspicion does not become proof because you say it quietly." The room sharpened. Alder lifted his head but didn't rise. Corbin looked toward him. Something like recognition passed across his face. That dog was listed as aggressive. "He was listed by someone who wanted the gate cleared," Beatrice said. Corbin met Malcolm's eyes again. "Crowell says you are unstable." Malcolm's right hand had begun to tremble near the table edge. He lowered it into his pocket. "Does he?" "He says you have a military injury, a failed marriage, and a personal attachment to the property dispute." "Which part of that is a crime?" "None, unless you help him turn it into one." That was the first useful thing Corbin said. Malcolm did not thank him. By evening, Corbin had agreed to locate the original welfare transport reports and verify whether Sentinel Range personnel had been acting only as property security or presenting themselves as county authority. It was not trust. It was a beginning with paperwork attached. The next morning, they drove west to find Silas Brannock. Silas lived outside town in a low ranch house, surrounded by stacked firewood, old fencing, and 3 weathered hunting blinds. He opened the door wearing a brown chore coat over a gray Henley. He was broad and heavy through the chest, with a bent nose, a close-cut gray beard, and hands large enough to make the coffee mug he held look borrowed from a child. A brass compass hung from his belt. He saw Malcolm, then Beatrice in the truck, and stopped pretending surprise. "You found Alder," he said. "He found us," Malcolm replied. Silas stepped outside and closed the door behind him. They spoke beside the woodpile. Years earlier, Silas had been known for chasing trespassers from leased hunting ground with more anger than judgment. After a fall through river ice nearly killed him, he returned to church, stopped drinking, and began delivering firewood to isolated residents. Malcolm distrusted redemption stories that arrived neatly packaged. Silas did not offer one. "I gave Sentinel Range maps," he said. Beatrice's face went still. Silas looked at her once, then away. "They said they needed to know where people camped during freezes. Said the county wanted everyone moved indoors." "And you believed them?" Malcolm asked. "I wanted to?" The answer disgusted Malcolm because it was honest. Silas explained that the security company paid him to identify informal camps, abandoned sheds, culverts, and seasonal cabins. He had convinced himself he was helping people reach heat and medical care. Then Vernon Quaid disappeared. Vernon was an old hunting companion with heart trouble and a habit of refusing charity unless it was described as borrowed. 2 weeks after a North Star clearance, a truck driver found him at a bus depot more than 100 miles east. He had no proper coat and only 2 doses of heart medication left. "I drove out to get him," Silas said. "He asked me how much they paid for the map." The wind moved through the stacked wood. "What did you tell him?" Beatrice asked. "The truth." "Did he forgive you?" "No." Silas said it without self-pity. After that, he began writing down every transport van and security vehicle he saw. Dates, times, plates, direction of travel. He went inside and returned with a narrow notebook wrapped in a plastic freezer bag. Malcolm did not take it. "You found God and started keeping records," he said. "That's supposed to make the first part noble?" "No." Silas's pale brown eyes held his. "Faith did not make what I did smaller. It made it harder to keep pretending I could do nothing next." Malcolm's anger remained, but it lost the clean edge that made dismissal easy. Silas extended the notebook again. "I do not need you to call me a good man," he said. "I need a chance to stop helping bad things happen." This time, Malcolm accepted it. Inside were 23 entries, several plate numbers repeated. One belonged to an Ironcrest van. 2 others were registered to Sentinel Range. On 4 dates, Silas had noted that a transport vehicle left North Star and drove east, away from Ironcrest. The notebook was not proof of mistreatment, but it was a direction. Silas agreed to give a formal statement and make his role public if necessary. The admission could cost him contracts with outfitters tied to Crown Elk Reserve. He did not ask whether Malcolm thought that sacrifice was enough. He seemed to know it was not. That night, Malcolm stood alone in the mudroom with his phone in his left hand. Dana's number was still saved. He had not called his younger sister in nearly 4 years. Their last argument had begun over a box of their father's belongings. Malcolm had sold 2 old watches, a service ring, and a set of hand tools to cover overdue bills. Dana had discovered it after the fact. She told him they had belonged to both of them. He told her she only came around when she wanted to inspect the damage. She said she was tired of loving a man who treated love like an accusation. Then he told her pity was not the same as loyalty. She had left without slamming the door, which somehow made it worse. Malcolm pressed the call button before he could improve his reasons for not doing it. Dana answered after 4 rings. "Malcolm?" Her voice was unchanged enough to make the missing years feel deliberate. "I need help reading public contracts," he said. Silence, not surprise, not forgiveness. "What kind?" "County emergency weather funding, business registrations, property options." Another silence. "Is someone in danger?" "Maybe several people." "Are you?" Malcolm looked toward the kitchen, where Beatrice slept in the chair and Alder lay beside her. "Not in the way you mean." Dana exhaled. "Send me what you have." "I need you here." That cost him more. He forced the words out before pride could edit them. "Dana, I need you." She arrived the following afternoon. She stepped from a Navy SUV wearing a charcoal wool blazer beneath a dark vest, burgundy sweater, black trousers, and brown boots made for city snow rather than Malcolm's ridge. Her chestnut hair, silvering at the roots, touched her collarbones. Square amber-brown glasses framed eyes the same blue-gray as Malcolm's, though hers looked directly at what his avoided. She carried a leather laptop bag and no visible affection. Malcolm opened the door. Dana looked at him, then at his trembling right hand, then passed him toward the cabin. "I came for the records," she said. "I know." That is not the same as coming back. I know. This time the repeated answer did not sound defensive. She entered. Dana worked for 6 hours without discussing the past. She downloaded county contracts, campaign disclosures, corporate registrations, reimbursement schedules, and the recorded purchase option on North Star. She did not hack bank accounts or produce secret documents. She simply read what everyone had filed publicly and assumed no ordinary person would take the time to connect. Near midnight, she tapped her mechanical pencil twice against the table. Malcolm remembered that habit from childhood. It meant she had found a number that refused to behave. Iron Crest and Sentinel Range bill separately, she said, but both are subsidiaries of Blackturn Holdings. Crowell's company? Beatrice asked. Not directly. Dana turned the laptop. Blackturn was managed by an investment partnership. One of its principal members also sat on the development board for Crown Elk Reserve. Crowell's attorney had signed the motel option on behalf of another entity within the same network. Then Dana opened the county reimbursement schedule. Iron Crest received a base payment for winter standby. It received additional money for every vulnerable adult documented as removed from a dangerous location. They are paid per transport, Malcolm said. Per successful relocation, Dana corrected. What counts as successful? A signed departure form and proof the person entered a vehicle. No requirement that the receiving shelter had room. No required follow-up after discharge. No confirmation that the person remained indoors. The system rewarded movement, not safety. The following morning, Marion called. She had located 2 names from earlier sections of Beatrice's ledger, not the unresolved 4, but people transported during the same period. One had been discharged from Iron Crest after 5 hours and sent to a shelter in another county. The shelter had already been full. The second had left Iron Crest in a contracted van. There was no verified destination in the county file. Marion's voice remained controlled, but the pauses between her sentences had changed. I am opening a formal review, she said. Beatrice closed her eyes. Malcolm expected relief. Instead, she looked suddenly older. How many more? She asked. We do not know. Later that day, Marion raised the possibility of temporary assisted housing for Beatrice while the investigation continued. It was a reasonable offer. Heat, meals, medication supervision, no stairs. Beatrice refused. Malcolm waited until Marion left before turning on her. You almost died outside that motel. I remember. You are still recovering. I am aware. You cannot make your lungs into an argument. And you cannot make fear sound like authority just because your voice gets lower. Malcolm's temper flared. This is not about North Star. No, Beatrice said. It is not. Then stop acting as if that building matters more than your life. Beatrice stood slowly, one hand braced against the table. I am not protecting a building. Her voice was quiet enough to end the argument more effectively than shouting. I am protecting the right to be noticed when a person disappears. Malcolm looked at the 4 names still written on the utility envelope. Leona, Milton, Caleb, Etta. He had thought the problem was that no one knew where they were. Now he understood the deeper danger. The paperwork did not list them as missing. It listed them as moved. A person without a current address, a nearby relative, or someone stubborn enough to keep asking could vanish between one facility and the next without ever becoming an emergency. The system did not need to erase them. It only needed to record that they had gone somewhere else. Malcolm picked up the envelope. We find them, he said. Not for Beatrice, not for the motel, because 4 human beings had been reduced to completed transportation forms, and someone needed to insist that a departure was not the same thing as a destination. By the end of the week, Malcolm's cabin no longer belonged to silence. Dana had covered one wall with sheets of butcher paper and columns of names, dates, transport numbers, receiving facilities, and unanswered calls. Marion kept consent forms in a waterproof folder beside the stove. Corbin came and went with copies of old transport reports, each visit leaving damp boot prints and a little less certainty in his face. Helena worked at the kitchen counter, speaking by phone with former patients who had agreed to let her confirm where they had gone after leaving Iron Crest. She never opened a chart without permission. Instead, she built a pattern from what people were willing to say. Beatrice occupied the chair nearest the stove and corrected everyone's spelling. Alder moved among them without ceremony. He did not paw at files or lead anyone toward hidden evidence. He simply seemed to know who had been sitting too long, who had forgotten to eat, and when Beatrice's breathing had changed. When Marion rubbed the bridge of her nose after 3 hours of calls, Alder lay beside her chair. When Dana fell asleep over a spreadsheet, he rested his chin on her boot until she woke. Whenever Beatrice coughed, his ears lifted before anyone else looked up. The cabin had become crowded, inefficient, and warmer than Malcolm liked. He discovered that warmth was not always a matter of temperature. Every morning before the others arrived, Alder waited beside the kitchen table while Malcolm took his medication. The first time it happened, Malcolm assumed the dog wanted food. He filled Alder's bowl. Alder did not move. Malcolm poured coffee, opened the orange prescription bottle, and swallowed the tablets. Only then did Alder eat. The second morning, the same thing happened. By the fourth, Malcolm stopped pretending it was accidental. "You have no medical authority," he told the dog. Alder chewed slowly, unimpressed. One morning, Malcolm's right hand jerked as he carried a mug from the counter. The coffee missed the table and struck the floor, breaking the cup at the handle. The room went quiet. Dana had just arrived. She stood near the door with her laptop bag still over one shoulder. Malcolm stared at the dark spill spreading between the boards. Before he could bend, Alder rose, took the dish towel hanging from the oven handle, and carried it to him. The old shepherd dropped it against Malcolm's knee, then sat. There was no alarm in the dog's face, no concern disguised as delicacy, only a practical response to a thing that had happened. Dana watched Malcolm press the towel into the spill. "Alder does not care whether you can hold a cup straight," she said. Malcolm kept his gaze on the floor. "He cares that you take the medicine and clean up what breaks." "Dana, you are the only one in this house using that hand as evidence against you." He stood too quickly. Pain flashed through his shoulder. "Do not turn a dog carrying a towel into therapy." "I am not." Her voice stayed level. "I am saying the dog has better judgment than you." Beatrice made a small sound behind her tea. It might have been a cough. It might not. Malcolm walked outside and stayed there until the cold reduced his anger to something more useful. That evening, after the others left, he placed a veteran's disability reassessment form on the table between himself and Dana. The form had been folded and unfolded often enough to soften along the creases. "I do not understand half of this," he said. Dana looked at the pages, then at him. "Do you want me to explain it or complete it?" "Both." She pulled out the chair beside him. There was no apology, no embrace, no promise that 4 years of damage had disappeared. Dana simply uncapped her mechanical pencil. For Malcolm, allowing her to stay was harder than asking her to come. They worked until midnight. The search for the 4 unresolved names progressed unevenly. Caleb Rourke was found first. Marion located him in a licensed care facility near Pierre. Caleb had arrived safely after leaving Iron Crest, but the phone number listed for his niece had been copied incorrectly. The facility had tried calling a stranger twice, then stopped. Caleb was warm, medically stable, and furious that everyone in Sunbreak Ridge apparently believed him dead. He would like it noted, Marion told Beatrice over speakerphone, that he has been winning at cards and does not intend to leave until the staff admits he is better at cribbage than they are. Beatrice closed her eyes in relief. Tell him the staff are probably letting him win. From the phone came Marion's pause. He heard that. Good. Etta Vale was traced next. She had been dropped at a bus station after the receiving shelter refused admission because no accessible bed was available. A church volunteer found her before nightfall and brought her to a temporary women's residence. She was safe now, but the transport records still described the relocation as successfully completed. That phrase remained on Dana's wall. Successfully completed. Malcolm began to hate it more each day. Leona Briggs took longer. Marion found her in a weather-beaten trailer beyond the edge of a small town east of the river. Helena and Graham accompanied Marion because Leona's neighbors said the old woman had not been seen outside for several days. Leona was 81, sharp-minded, severely underweight, and keeping herself alive with a space heater plugged into an extension cord that became hot enough to soften its own casing. The water line beneath the trailer had frozen. She had been rejected by the shelter listed in her transport record because her insurance would not cover the medical supervision they believed she needed. A contracted driver left her with an acquaintance who promised she could stay. The acquaintance disappeared 2 days later. When Helena called from the trailer, her anger came through in the precision of every word. "She is alive," she said. "She needs treatment, food, and somewhere safe. She also understands exactly what happened to her." Leona agreed to make a statement. 3 names now had destinations. Only Milton Graves remained. Meanwhile, Thaddeus Crowell went on the radio. He chose the morning program most ranchers listened to while feeding livestock. His voice was smooth, measured, and almost sorrowful. Crowell spoke about Sunbreak Ridge losing jobs, young adults moving away, and county services surviving on shrinking tax revenue. Crown Elk Reserve, he said, would bring guides, construction crews, suppliers, and year-round tourism. Then the host asked about North Star. Crowell did not call Malcolm dangerous. He called him troubled. He did not accuse Beatrice of breaking the law. He expressed concern that an elderly woman had been encouraged to operate an unsafe building. He said vulnerable people deserved proper care, not romantic gestures in rooms with old wiring and portable heaters. He mentioned Malcolm's military retirement and suggested the dispute had become personal. Malcolm listened from the cabin kitchen. Crowell's words were dishonest in their purpose, but not entirely in their content. North Star was unsafe. Beatrice had opened rooms without inspection. People could have died there. That truth entered the room before anyone spoke. Silas looked ready to throw the radio into the stove. Malcolm turned it off. "He is right about the building," he said. Beatrice looked at him. "He is using the truth to bury the rest." That does not make the truth disappear. The next call Malcolm made was not to the radio station. It was to Fire Chief Everett Sloan. Everett arrived at North Star the following afternoon with an independent building inspector and the expression of a man who had been invited to ruin everyone's optimism. He was 59, square through the shoulders and neck, with close-cropped white-gray hair and a pale burn scar running from below his right ear toward his collar. He wore a navy canvas jacket, black work pants, and a white fire helmet tucked under one arm. A yellow tape measure hung from his belt. He greeted Beatrice politely, Malcolm briefly, and Alder with caution. Then he entered the motel and began finding reasons no one should be inside it. The office ceiling showed water damage. Several outlets had scorched plates. The north wing had a cracked support beam and insulation hanging loose behind the walls. 2 windows had been painted shut. The old furnace had not been inspected in years. Everett marked each problem with a red pen. "No occupancy in the office," he said. "No occupancy in the north wing." No discussion. Beatrice folded her arms. Everett looked at her over the top of his clipboard. "I am not Crowell." "I did not say you were. You looked like you were preparing the speech." She said nothing. The south wing was better. Its roofline remained sound. The exterior doors opened properly. The plumbing could be restored. With new electrical circuits, inspected heaters, interconnected smoke detectors, extinguishers, emergency lighting, marked exits, and a formal check-in procedure, Everett believed a limited cold weather permit might be possible. "Might," he repeated. Malcolm studied the list. It was longer than he had expected and more expensive than he could afford. Everett tapped the doorframe twice with the end of his pen. "Compassion does not exempt a building from fire." "No," Malcolm said. "It makes getting this right more important." Everett finally looked at him with something other than suspicion. They applied for a provisional emergency use permit. While the county reviewed it, Malcolm organized a public repair day. He did not present it as Saving North Star. He posted the inspection report on the front office window, along with the list of repairs, costs, and the rules under which the south wing might reopen. People came because they were curious. Some came because they supported Beatrice. Some came because they had heard Crowell on the radio and wanted to watch Malcolm fail responsibly. Silas arrived first with a trailer of lumber. Before unloading it, he stood near the broken sign and asked for everyone's attention. There were perhaps 30 people in the parking lot. Silas removed his cap. He admitted that he had given Sentinel range maps showing where people without shelter stayed during winter. He had accepted money. He had told himself he was helping. No one interrupted. "I cannot tell you I did not know better," Silas said. "I knew enough to ask more questions. I chose not to." A man near the back put down his hammer and walked away. Then a woman followed him. Silas did not ask them to stay. He picked up a board and carried it to the south wing. A few minutes later, someone else took the other end. The work moved slowly. Helena set up a medical table in one of the cleared rooms. Graham inventoried oxygen tanks, first aid kits, and blankets. Dana tracked every donated dollar and box of screws. Marion designed a consent and intake process that treated guests as adults rather than problems to be stored. Everett rejected nearly everything on the first attempt. The exit sign was too high. The extinguisher brackets were mounted incorrectly. The temporary ramp was too steep. At one point, Malcolm told him the old building had survived 60 winters. Everett replied, "So has Beatrice. I would still recommend medical care." Alder stationed himself by the office door, watching workers pass. When Everett approached after inspecting the rear exit, Alder rose and blocked him. The dog did not growl. He simply stood across the threshold and refused to move. Everett looked at Malcolm. "Is this part of the inspection?" Malcolm caught the sharp chemical scent on the chief's boots. "Wildlife repellent," he said. "Alder hates it." "I inspected a shed this morning." Malcolm fetched an old pair of clean work boots from his truck. Everett stared at them. "You're asking the fire chief to change shoes before entering a condemned motel." "I am asking you to satisfy the senior door staff." Beatrice, seated behind a folding table, said, "He has been employed longer than you." Everett changed boots. Alder sniffed once and stepped aside. The workers laughed, including Everett, though he tried to hide it by checking the smoke detector spacing again. By late afternoon, the south wing looked less like a ruin and more like a place under construction. Not safe yet, but moving toward safe. As Malcolm stood in the parking lot, he realized the important change was not the repaired doors or fresh wiring. The work was visible. No one was hiding vulnerable people in unmarked rooms. No one was asking the town to trust a private promise. The rules, failures, Names and costs were posted where anyone could question them. The door would not open because Beatrice believed it should. It would open because a community accepted responsibility for what happened after someone crossed the threshold. Corbin arrived near sunset. He did not park. He stepped from his cruiser, holding a printed still image. "I found Milton," he said. Every tool seemed to stop at once. Corbin placed the image on the hood of Malcolm's truck. It came from a traffic camera 3 weeks earlier. The picture was grainy, but Milton Graves's face matched the photograph Beatrice had provided. He was climbing out of an Iron Crest transport van at a rural junction several miles east of North Star. The official report said Milton had been delivered to a care facility 60 miles in the opposite direction. Corbin pointed to the next frame. Milton stood alone beside the road. The van drove away. A later camera captured him walking west, toward North Star. "He never reached the facility," Corbin said, "and no one filed a missing person report because the paperwork said the transport was complete." Beatrice gripped the edge of the truck hood. "How long ago?" 23 days. The winter air seemed to widen around them. Corbin removed his hat. "I have opened an official search for a vulnerable missing adult." Malcolm looked past the motel toward the darkening hills. North Star's doors were not yet allowed to open. But somewhere beyond them, Milton Graves had been walking back toward a place he believed might. The search for Milton Graves began before sunrise. Corbin established a temporary command point in the North Star parking lot, using the hood of his cruiser as a map table. Marion handled the missing adult documentation and contact chain. Graham checked radios and cold weather packs. Silas unfolded 3 old topographic maps marked with hunting trails, drainage cuts, abandoned cabins, and maintenance roads that no longer appeared on county navigation systems. Malcolm stood beside them in his olive combat shirt beneath a weathered field jacket, a first aid pack strapped across his back. A handheld radio rested against his left shoulder. His right hand was already stiff from the cold. Corbin divided the area into sectors. "This is not a manhunt," he said. "Milton is 76, medically vulnerable, and may be confused or frightened. No one corners him. No one assumes silence means refusal." He looked at Malcolm when he said the last part. Malcolm understood the warning. The traffic cameras had shown Milton walking west after the Iron Crest van left him beside the road. 23 days had passed, snowstorms had erased tracks, and the temperature had dropped below zero more than once. No one said aloud what the odds looked like. Beatrice waited near the office door, wrapped in her teal coat and brick-red scarf. Helena had forbidden her from joining the search. She accepted the decision with the expression of a monarch temporarily tolerating a constitution. Alder stood beside her. The old shepherd wore an olive-gray thermal coat over his yellow and black fur. His left eye caught the morning light with a faint cloudiness. He was stronger than when Malcolm found him in the storm, but age remained visible in the careful placement of his hind legs. When Malcolm approached, Alder stepped toward him. "You are not coming far," Malcolm said. Alder looked past him toward the snowy service road. That was not a negotiation. Beatrice placed a hand on the dog's shoulder. "Arthur used to take that route." Silas glanced over. "What route?" "The reservoir maintenance road. Before the county fenced the lower access, Arthur used it to deliver blankets and fuel to stranded hunters and road crews." Corbin checked the map. "The road splits less than a mile from here." Malcolm looked at Alder. The dog was not pulling or whining. He simply faced the road with a stillness that carried memory more clearly than excitement. "We take him to the junction," Malcolm said. "No farther." Helena, standing near Graham's rescue vehicle, pointed a gloved finger at him. "If the dog limps, coughs, or slows, he comes back." "You enjoy giving orders outside your license." "My license covers poor decisions involving damaged bodies." That keeps you both well within jurisdiction." They started out in a line. Fresh snow softened the maintenance road beneath their boots. Pines crowded close on either side, their branches heavy and bright. Beyond them, the black hills rose under a winter sky so clear that distance looked deceptively harmless. Alder moved beside Malcolm for the first half-mile. His pace was slow but steady. Every few minutes, Malcolm shortened his own stride without acknowledging it. At the junction, the main road bent toward the frozen reservoir. A narrower path disappeared behind a ridge of scrub pine and snow-covered service posts. Alder stopped. He lifted his muzzle, testing the air, then looked toward the narrow road. Silas knelt beside the map. "That old line runs to 2 maintenance shelters and a pump station," he said. "County stopped using the lower shelter 6 years ago." Corbin checked the camera times against estimated walking speed. If Milton kept west, he could have reached this junction before dark. Alder stepped toward the narrow route. His rear leg faltered. Malcolm caught the harness before the dog fell. "That is enough." Alder resisted only by keeping his head turned toward the road. Malcolm crouched. "I heard you." For a moment, the dog's amber eyes held his. Then Malcolm passed the leash to Beatrice. Alder watched the search team continue without him. He did not bark. He simply stood beside the woman he had once protected in the snow, facing the route Arthur had taught him years before. The narrow road changed the search. Silas knew where the snow drifted deepest and where a man on foot might leave the road to avoid wind. Corbin radioed the second team to check the pump station. Graham and Marion moved toward the upper shelter. Malcolm stayed with Silas on the lower line. They found the first sign near a culvert, not a footprint. A strip of gray wool caught on a rusted fence wire. Silas touched it with 2 fingers. Could be weeks old. Malcolm photographed it and marked the location. Farther down, the road narrowed to a shelf above the frozen reservoir. Wind had scoured the snow thin enough to expose old gravel. A crushed soup can lay beside a maintenance post. No rust. Malcolm's pulse changed. They moved faster. The lower shelter appeared almost invisible against the hillside. A squat utility building with a corrugated roof, 1 boarded window, and a door held shut by a length of wire. Silas raised one hand. "Milton?" he called. "It is Silas Brannock. We are here with the sheriff's department." No answer. Malcolm saw smoke staining the metal above a vent pipe. Not fresh smoke, but recent enough. Corbin's voice came over the radio. "Hold position. We are 5 minutes out." Then something struck the inside of the door. Once, weakly. Malcolm moved before Silas could stop him. The wire had been twisted from the inside. Malcolm pulled at it, but his right fingers would not cooperate in the cold. Silas reached past him, unwound the wire, and opened the door. The smell inside was damp clothing, old fuel, and human illness. Milton Graves sat against the far wall beneath a pile of insulation blankets. He was thin enough that the coat around him looked borrowed. His beard had grown white and uneven over a narrow face. One cheek was bruised yellow from an old fall. His boots were wrapped in plastic grocery bags. He held a length of pipe across his knees. "Stay there," Milton said. His voice cracked midway through the sentence. Malcolm stopped inside the doorway, leaving the exit open behind him. "My name is Malcolm Reed. Beatrice sent us." The pipe lowered an inch. "Beatrice alive?" "Yes." "Alder?" "Alive, too." Milton closed his eyes. The pipe slipped from his hands. Graham and Marion arrived minutes later. Helena joined by radio while Graham checked Milton's temperature, pulse, oxygen level, and feet. He was dehydrated, malnourished, and mildly hypothermic, with a respiratory infection that had not yet become critical. He had survived because the maintenance shelter still contained emergency blankets, a rusted camp stove, and several cans of food left by workers years earlier. Luck had played a role. So had stubbornness. As Graham prepared warm fluids, Marion sat near the door and explained that Milton could refuse questions until he was medically stable. Milton shook his head. "I have been stable enough to know what they said." He told them the Iron Crest van had picked him up near North Star during a cold weather sweep. At first, he agreed to go. The heater worked. A nurse checked his blood pressure. They told him he would be taken somewhere with beds. Then, while the van stopped for fuel, Milton overheard the driver speaking with a Sentinel Range employee. North Star had to be cleared before the state inspection. The old motel would be gone before Crowell announced the resort expansion. One man used the phrase, "clean the corridor." Milton asked where they were taking him. No one answered directly. When the van stopped at the rural junction to deal with an engine warning, Milton got out. The driver ordered him back inside. Milton refused. The Sentinel employee threatened to call law enforcement. Milton walked away before anyone decided how serious the threat was. "Why come back toward North Star?" Marion asked. Milton rubbed both hands around the warm cup Graham gave him. "The ledger." Malcolm looked at him. "My brother's number was in it," Milton said. "Raymond. We stopped speaking 12 years ago. Beatrice wrote the number down when I still had it." "You could have asked the county," Corbin said. Milton looked at the deputy's uniform. "I had just been left on a road by people with county paperwork." Corbin accepted the answer without defense. Milton had reached the maintenance shelter before the next storm. His strength failed before he could make it back to North Star. His account did not prove Crowell ordered anyone abandoned. It did not prove the phrase, "clean the corridor," meant illegal removal. But it showed the transport system hadn't functioned as protection, and that at least one contractor viewed human beings as obstacles to a development schedule. Corbin recorded the statement only after Milton agreed. Marion documented his condition and the location where he was found. Graham radioed Helena to prepare for transport. Malcolm stepped outside while the others worked. The reservoir lay below the shelter, frozen white beneath the noon sun. From that distance, winter looked peaceful. Silas joined him. "You were right not to trust me," Silas said. Malcolm did not look over. "This is not the moment for confession. No, it is the moment after a man almost died because I helped strangers know where to find him." Malcolm watched Corbin's team load Milton onto the rescue sled. "What do you want me to say?" "Nothing." Silas pulled his brass compass from his coat and turned it once in his palm. "I used to think repentance meant becoming someone else. It does not. It means being the same man and refusing the same excuse." Malcolm finally looked at him. "Then keep refusing." Silas nodded. It was not forgiveness, but it was work they could continue. Milton spent one night under medical observation, then was released to Malcolm's cabin because he refused placement anywhere connected to Iron Crest. Marion approved the temporary arrangement only after Helena established a care plan and Graham promised daily transport if Milton's condition worsened. When Milton entered the cabin, Alder rose from beside Beatrice. The old dog crossed the room slowly. Milton lowered one hand. Alder placed his silvered head on the man's knee. Milton's mouth trembled. "Still working the front desk," he whispered. Beatrice reached into her bag and removed a faded photograph. Arthur Kellen sat behind the North Star reception counter, younger and broad through the shoulders, one arm resting beside an open ledger. At his feet, Alder, black-muzzled then, without the silver of age, lay with his head on the knee of a sleeping veteran in a borrowed motel blanket. Malcolm studied the picture. He had assumed Alder returned to North Star because he could not understand Arthur was dead. That loyalty had trapped the dog in one place, waiting for an impossible reunion. The photograph suggested something else. Arthur had not taught Alder merely to wait for him. He had taught the dog what the motel was for. A person entered cold, tired, ashamed, or forgotten. Someone noticed. A door opened. Alder stayed because the duty remained even after the man who taught it was gone. Malcolm looked around the cabin. Beatrice near the stove, Milton under a blanket, Dana at the table, reviewing public records. Alder between them, old body resting at last because everyone was inside. The idea that came to Malcolm was not sentimental. It was structural. North Star could not remain a secret arrangement operated by Beatrice's courage. It needed inspection, staffing, documented intake, medical oversight, and a legal purpose Crowell could not dismiss as trespassing. The next morning, Malcolm called a public meeting at the volunteer fire hall. He stood before ranchers, business owners, church volunteers, county staff, and people who had come mostly to see whether Crowell's description of him was accurate. Malcolm did not speak about destiny. He presented Everett's safety list. He presented the costs. He presented a proposal to operate only the repaired south wing as a supervised emergency cold weather stop, not a permanent shelter. Helena would establish medical screening. Marion would advise on consent and referrals. Graham would coordinate transport. Every guest would be checked in and checked out by name. No hidden rooms, Malcolm said. No unrecorded transfers. No one leaves without a confirmed destination. A reporter from a statewide paper listened from the back row. Dana had sent her the public contracts, corporate registrations, and reimbursement schedules. Marion announced a formal review of the transport consent forms. Helena had filed a professional complaint regarding discharge practices at Iron Crest. Corbin confirmed his office was examining signatures made while individuals were documented as medicated, feverish, or cognitively impaired. The proposal did not pass without argument. Some residents feared costs, some supported Crown Elk Reserve and the jobs it promised. Others asked why Sunbreak Ridge should become responsible for people from elsewhere. Malcolm did not answer every objection with morality. He answered with limits, procedures, insurance requirements, and funding sources. The door could open only if everyone knew who was responsible for keeping it safe. 2 days later, Thaddeus Crowell came to the cabin. He arrived alone in a black SUV wearing a camel cashmere coat, dark trousers, and leather gloves too clean for the ridge. His black and silver hair was combed back perfectly. A thin steel watch showed beneath his cuff. Crowell did not threaten Malcolm. He admired the view. Then he offered to buy the cabin for more than it was worth, cover Alder's veterinary expenses, and arrange a private room for Beatrice at an excellent senior residence. "You could walk away from this with everyone cared for," Crowell said. "Everyone?" "The people you are personally responsible for." Malcolm understood the boundary Crowell had drawn. Care for a few. Abandon the principle. Crowell looked through the window at Beatrice, Milton, and Alder. "You are trying to turn lost people into a family because you could not keep your real one." The words reached the old wound. They simply no longer owned it. Malcolm looked at him. "Family is not a prize for people who never failed," he said. "Sometimes it is whoever still leaves a place beside the fire after everyone has." Crowell's expression did not change, but his offer did. "You will regret making this public." "It was public before I arrived. People just stopped looking." Crowell left without shaking his hand. The provisional permit came 3 days later. Only the south wing, maximum 12 guests, medical oversight during activation, working alarms, marked exits, extinguishers, intake records, and an evacuation plan approved by Everett. It was not victory. It was permission to begin. The first activation was scheduled for the next severe cold front. A state inspector would arrive the following morning to review the operation. That night, Malcolm sat at the cabin table while Dana checked the motel's new camera feeds on her laptop. One screen went black, then another. "Power issue?" Malcolm asked. Dana refreshed the system. "All exterior cameras are offline." Alder lifted his head from the rug. The windows were closed, but the old shepherd rose and moved toward the door. His nose lifted. Malcolm smelled it a second later. Smoke. His phone sounded the North Star fire alarm. He crossed to the window. 2 miles below the ridge, orange light climbed through the pines. The silver star above the motel glowed against the night as flames rose around it. The first official cold weather shift at North Star began under a hard, moonlit sky. By 8 in the evening, 9 older guests had been checked into the repaired south wing. Their names, medications, emergency contacts, room numbers, and mobility needs were written on a large board beside the rear exit. Dana had insisted on duplicate copies. One remained at the front desk, the other hung in a weatherproof sleeve outside. No one entered without being recorded. No one left without a confirmed destination. That rule had become the moral spine of the place. Graham Vickery handled the medical station from room 12, where oxygen tanks, blankets, thermometers, and first aid supplies were arranged with the neatness of someone who knew panic loved clutter. Beatrice sat behind a folding reception desk wearing her wine-red apron over a teal cardigan, her brass keys resting beside the check-in book. Helena had forbidden her from working alone overnight. Beatrice had accepted that order in the same spirit a mountain accepts a fence. Milton Graves, still thin but recovering, helped carry cups of coffee between rooms. Alder lay near the inside entrance, his old body stretched across a woven mat where he could see both the hallway and the front door. The repaired wing smelled of fresh lumber, radiator heat, and soup. For the first time in years, North Star sounded like people again. There were coughs behind doors, a radio playing low-country music, someone laughing at the stubborn vending machine Graham had brought back to life with a screwdriver and what he called professional diplomacy. Outside, the temperature fell fast. The wind came down from the hills in long, cutting gusts, lifting powdery snow across the parking lot. The state inspector was expected after sunrise. At 10:43, the exterior cameras went dark. Dana saw it first from Malcolm's cabin. One by one, the images on her laptop froze. Front lot, office entrance, service road, then black. A few seconds later, Alder rose from the rug. His nose lifted toward the cabin door. Malcolm smelled smoke when he opened it. His phone screamed with the fire alarm from North Star. For half a heartbeat, the orange glow below the ridge looked too large to belong to the motel. Then the wind shifted, and flames rose behind the silver star. Malcolm was already moving. Dana grabbed the emergency binder. Helena took her medical bag. Silas, who had stayed late at the cabin after helping prepare for the cold front, ran for his truck. Alder climbed into the rear seat before Malcolm could stop him. "No," Malcolm said. The old shepherd stood braced against the floor, eyes fixed downhill. There was no time to argue. They took Silas's four-wheel drive pickup because it had chains fitted over the tires. The truck descended the ridge through blowing snow, suspension hammering over ruts. Dana called Corbin. Helena contacted Graham. Malcolm listened to the alarm over the phone and tried to separate information from fear. The office was burning. Smoke had entered the connecting corridor. The south wing alarms were active. Evacuation had begun. "Graham says all 9 registered guests are moving," Helena reported. "Registered?" Dana repeated. The word troubled Malcolm. He did not yet know why. North Star appeared through the trees in a sheet of orange light. The office roof was on fire. Flames poured from 2 front windows and climbed the old awning. The broken silver star above the lot reflected the blaze until it seemed to burn from within. Corbin's cruiser blocked the main entrance. He stood in the road wearing a department parka and directing arriving vehicles away from the icy shoulder. "Fire trucks are 3 minutes out," he shouted as Malcolm jumped from the pickup. "The lower grade is glazed over." People were already moving from the south wing toward the far end of the parking lot. Graham and Milton supported a gray-haired man between them. Beatrice held the registration board against her chest while calling names. 2 volunteers guided a woman using a walker toward a warmed van. Smoke rolled low beneath the eaves. Malcolm reached Beatrice. "How many?" "9 registered, 8 outside." "Who is missing?" "Ruth Canner, room 7. Graham heard them. "She is with Helena's volunteer at the side exit." A voice called from the darkness. "Here." A woman in a wool hat emerged with Ruth wrapped in a blanket. 9. All registered guests accounted for. The obvious danger should have eased. It did not. The fire had begun in the office, well away from the repaired rooms. Yet flames were already pushing through the narrow connecting corridor. Someone had either chosen the worst possible place to start it or understood the building well enough to know the wind would carry it south. Malcolm pulled the manual alarm lever outside the south wing. The bell began clanging above them, louder than the electronic siren, a hard mechanical warning that cut through the wind. "Second sweep," he ordered. "No one alone. Check bathrooms, closets, laundry room, then report outside." Corbin looked at him sharply. "You are not command." "No, but Everett is not here yet, and we have a checklist." That distinction mattered. Corbin nodded once. "Pair up." Malcolm did not run toward the deepest smoke. He took the exterior evacuation board, assigned volunteers to people with limited mobility, and marked each room as it was checked. Dana coordinated blankets and vehicle seats. Helena established a triage point behind the snowbank where the wind carried smoke away. Silas helped Graham roll a wheeled evacuation chair toward the side entrance. Every awkward drill Everett had forced them to practice now became useful. The ramp everyone had complained about held steady. The emergency lights remained on. The outward opening exit door did not jam. The illuminated room numbers made the second sweep faster. The building was still dangerous, but it was not chaos. Alder moved beside Malcolm as far as the connecting corridor. Smoke hung in a gray layer near the ceiling. Malcolm tied a damp cloth loosely around his own mouth and kept the dog low. "No farther," he told him. Alder ignored the command long enough to reach the old laundry room door at the end of the south hall. Then he stopped. His body became rigid. The room was not listed for occupancy. It had been cleared for storage and was supposed to remain locked. Alder pressed his nose to the gap beneath the door. "Alder." The shepherd gave one short bark, not frantic, certain. Beatrice appeared at the far end of the hall, supported by Dana. "What is it?" Malcolm called. Beatrice stared toward the laundry room. Then her face changed. Milton brought someone in before supper. Milton, outside with Graham, had mentioned an older veteran walking the frontage road. The man refused formal intake because he feared being entered into another county system. Milton had persuaded him to rest in the laundry room until Beatrice could speak with him. Then the pipes froze in room 4. A guest became ill. The check-in never happened. The man had vanished from everyone's attention without ever leaving the building. "What is his name?" Malcolm asked. "I do not know." That answer struck with the force of a confession. Malcolm tried the handle. Locked. The key ring was on Beatrice's desk inside the office, now engulfed. Silas arrived with a pry bar. Together they forced the door wide enough to enter. The room was dark except for the red pulse of emergency lighting from the corridor. Smoke had drifted in through a vent. A folding cot stood near the far wall. An elderly man lay on the floor beside it. He wore an old denim coat and a veteran's cap that had fallen several feet away. Malcolm crossed to him, checked for breathing, and found a weak pulse. Alive. Silas rolled the evacuation chair through the doorway. They lifted the man onto it, secured the chest strap, and turned toward the hall. A gust struck the building. Something cracked above them. The upper part of the doorframe twisted as heat warped the connecting structure. The chair's front locking assembly caught against the bent threshold. Silas pulled. The wheel would not release. Smoke thickened behind them. "Lift the front," Malcolm said. They tried. The chair shifted only an inch. A removable transport pin held the front brace in place. If released, the lower frame could fold enough to clear the warped threshold. Malcolm knelt. He found the pin by touch. His right fingers shook violently. Cold, smoke, pain, and urgency narrowed his control until the small metal clip might as well have been welded shut. He could feel Silas waiting. In another life, Malcolm would have turned his body to hide the failure. He would have tried again and again. He would have spent precious seconds proving he was still the man he remembered. The unconscious veteran coughed once beneath the blanket. Malcolm moved his hand away. "Silas, I cannot get the pin." There was no explanation, no apology. Silas dropped beside him. "I have it." His larger fingers closed around the clip and pulled it free. The front frame folded. Malcolm took the flashlight, held the cloth over the man's mouth, and called instructions toward the hallway. "Pull on 3. Keep the chair level." Dana and Corbin took hold from the other side. 1, 2, 3. The chair cleared the doorway. They moved down the hall as burning material fell into the corridor behind them. Alder stayed near Malcolm's left leg until they reached the exit. The moment the veteran crossed into open air, part of the corridor roof collapsed. The impact sent sparks through the broken windows. Malcolm turned toward the sound. Corbin caught his shoulder. "No one else is inside." Malcolm looked toward Beatrice. She was holding the board, 9 registered names, and 1 blank line Dana had written beneath them. Unknown male. Laundry room. A name would come later. For now, the line meant he had been counted. Fire engines finally came through the gate, tires chained and sirens cutting against the wind. Everett Sloan stepped down before the first truck had fully stopped, already fastening his helmet. He took one look at the office, the wind direction, and the evacuated guests. Then command changed hands. "Everyone behind the second cruiser," he ordered. "Water team on the south exposure. Keep the office fire from crossing the breezeway." Malcolm did not argue. Everett's crew attacked the fire from the protected side, opening the roof only where necessary and using the repaired fire doors to contain the spread. The office was lost. The old records room burned through. But the south wing held. Helena and Graham treated smoke inhalation, cold exposure, and 1 twisted ankle. No one died. That fact did not feel like luck alone. It felt like every boring correction Everett had demanded, every duplicated list, every marked exit, every volunteer who had practiced instead of assuming courage would be enough. Near midnight, the flames were reduced to steam and blackened timber. Dana stood beside Silas's truck, staring at the dash camera screen. "When we arrived," she said, "something was leaving by the service road." The video showed a pickup moving away without headlights for several seconds before turning onto the county road. No visible license plate, but the truck had a contractor rack and a damaged right taillight. Corbin copied the footage and ordered units to check the nearby routes. At the office ruins, investigators found the remains of a solvent container. Its placement and burn pattern did not resemble an electrical fire. Everett crouched near the debris. "This started fast," he said. Malcolm looked toward the south wing, where survivors sat wrapped in blankets. "Fast enough to outrun the alarms?" "No." Everett stood. The alarms did what they were supposed to do. That distinction mattered too. The office had held duplicate permit papers, maintenance records, and Beatrice's original winter ledger. Dana had scanned the important pages weeks earlier and sent protected copies to Marion. Beatrice watched the burned roof collapse inward. "The ledger is gone," Malcolm said. She kept her eyes on the smoke. "The paper is." Her voice was tired but steady. "The names are not." Later evidence came in fragments rather than revelation. The pickup was traced to a subcontractor used by Sentinel Range. Phone location data placed 2 company employees near North Star at the time of the fire. The solvent container came from a batch bought with a corporate purchasing card. A recovered message on one employee's phone read, "Make the office unusable before inspection." Another employee agreed to cooperate after learning the fire had endangered occupied rooms. Records showed Crowell had called the Sentinel Range supervisor shortly before the cameras failed. None of it was a perfect confession. Together, it was becoming difficult to explain away. Dawn came pale and bitter. The silver North Star sign had fallen into the snow. Malcolm found Alder beside it. The old shepherd's fur was gray with ash. 2 paws were reddened and beginning to blister. He lay with his head across Beatrice's boots while Helena examined him. Beatrice kept one hand on his neck. Malcolm knelt. His right hand trembled as he touched the worn brass star on Alder's collar. For once he did not hide it. Dana stood nearby. Silas had soot ground into his beard. Graham carried the empty oxygen case. Everett watched his crew coil frozen hoses. "I do not know if I can build this again," Malcolm said. He had expected the admission to feel like defeat. Instead, it created room around him. Dana crouched on Alder's other side. "Good," she said. Malcolm looked at her. "Because this time," she continued, "you will not be allowed to build it alone." Behind them, the south wing remained standing, blackened at one end, smoke-stained, full of people who had made it outside because someone had written down their names. The investigation lasted through spring, summer, and most of the following fall. By then, the fire-blackened snow had long melted from North Star's parking lot. Grass returned in thin, stubborn patches between the cracks. Rain washed soot down the office walls. The silver star sign lay beneath a tarp behind the south wing, bent but not broken. Thaddeus Crowell was indicted on charges connected to conspiracy to commit arson, obstruction, and fraudulent use of county transportation contracts. The case had not reached trial. His attorneys challenged warrants, questioned witnesses, and described every link between Crowell and Sentinel Range as ordinary business contact. There was no clean confession, no dramatic moment in which the entire truth stood up and introduced itself. There were purchase records, phone logs, messages, altered reports, testimony from a cooperating contractor, and a pattern that became harder to explain as coincidence. Iron Crest Recovery Center was barred from accepting new residents, while the state and medical board investigated its discharge and transport practices. Several county employees were placed on administrative leave for approving cross-county transfers without confirming that anyone had actually been received. Some people called those consequences accountability. Others called them politics. Malcolm learned that justice, like rebuilding, made more noise than progress and moved slower than grief. Corbin Shaw spoke at a public county meeting in June. He wore his tan uniform and stood beneath fluorescent lights before a room full of ranchers, reporters, church volunteers, and people who had learned to distrust every official sentence. He did not say he had only followed policy. He did not say he had never taken money. He removed his hat and placed it on the table. "I signed reports because the boxes were complete," he said. "I believed a completed form meant a completed duty. It did not." The room stayed quiet. "I saw people enter vans. I did not confirm they reached safety. That failure belongs to me, whether or not anyone intended harm." Malcolm watched from the back wall. The admission did not erase what Corbin had failed to do. It did something more useful. It made the failure public enough that no one could quietly rename it later. Marion Greeley used the investigation to push for a new regional protocol. Any vulnerable adult transported across county lines during an emergency now required a confirmed receiving contact, documented arrival, and one named person responsible for follow-up within 24 hours. The rule was not revolutionary, That was what made the old absence of it so difficult to forgive. Silas Brannock lost nearly all of his hunting guide contracts. Crown Elk affiliates stopped using him. 2 landowners canceled seasonal work. At church, some people refused to sit near him. Others treated his confession as a performance designed to improve his reputation. Vernon Quaid met him once at a diner outside Rapid City. Silas apologized without mentioning faith, intentions, or the man he hoped to become. Vernon listened, finished his coffee, and said, "I believe you are sorry." Silas waited. "I am not ready for that to help me." Silas nodded. Then he paid for both meals and left. He continued delivering firewood. He continued showing up at North Star with tools. Redemption, he discovered, was mostly repetition without applause. The motel itself did not rise again in a montage of hammers, donations, and sudden sunlight. For months it looked worse. The office had to be stripped to its frame. Part of the connecting corridor was demolished. Engineers inspected the foundation. Old wiring came out in coils blackened by age and heat. A contractor found a lead paint in 2 rooms and asbestos insulation behind a utility wall. Every discovery cost money. Dana Reed kept the accounts in 3 ledgers and 2 encrypted files. She rejected donations with unclear conditions, argued with insurers, and created a non-profit board that included people who would disagree with Malcolm on purpose. "You do not need a board that admires you," she told him. "You need one that notices when you are wrong. I already have you. You cannot list irritating sister as internal control. I can try." She almost smiled. The North Star Winter Way Station was incorporated in late summer. It was not licensed as a hospital, nursing home, or permanent shelter. It was a short-term cold-weather stop for older adults, veterans, and medically vulnerable travelers who needed heat, food, basic assessment, and a verified next destination. The South Wing reopened first. 8 rooms, a wheelchair-accessible entrance, new electrical service, inspected heaters, interconnected alarms and sprinklers, an intake desk that recorded names without reducing people to numbers. A medication cabinet supervised under Helena's protocols. 2 phones that guests could use without asking permission. Every departure required a confirmed address, a receiving person, and a follow-up call. The North Wing remained boarded. The office was rebuilt only halfway. There was never enough money. That, too, made the place real. Graham coordinated transportation using a schedule that allowed for weather, medical needs, and the possibility that human beings did not always cooperate with timetables. Everett inspected the building so often that volunteers began hiding crooked shelves before he arrived. He always found them. "Gravity is patient," he would say. "It can wait longer than you can." Marion connected guests to longer-term housing, medical care, benefits, and family when family was safe to contact. Corbin began stopping by during cold weather activations. At first, people stiffened when they saw the uniform, so he changed his first question. He no longer asked, "Who needs to leave?" He asked, "Is anyone looking for somebody here?" Beatrice returned to the front desk 3 afternoons a week. Helena prohibited more. Beatrice considered this an insult to both her health and the calendar. She wore her teal cardigan, wine-red apron, and reading glasses on a cord. The brass keys remained clipped at her waist, even though most of them no longer opened anything. The new system used coded locks. Beatrice distrusted them on principle. She remembered every guest's name, preferred coffee, medication time, and whether they wanted conversation or quiet. Beside the register, she placed a second cup of coffee each morning. No one asked whom it was for. Sometimes the coffee went cold untouched. Sometimes Beatrice drank it herself and claimed Arthur had always been wasteful. Alder's bed rested beside the reception desk. The old shepherd became the unofficial symbol of North Star, though Beatrice rejected every proposed logo that made him look too young. "He has earned the gray," she said. "His strength never fully returned. The burns on his paws healed, but winter stiffness settled deeper into his hind legs. Some mornings he could not rise without Malcolm sliding one arm beneath his chest and supporting his hips. Alder accepted help with the offended dignity of an old judge being assisted into court. Once standing, he inspected the hall. He paused at each open door. He greeted new arrivals by sniffing their hands and then deciding whether they required supervision. He still disliked strong alcohol, wildlife repellent, and Everett's original work boots. He also stole Malcolm's gloves. Not every pair, only the right glove. Malcolm found them beneath the reception desk, behind Alder's bed, and once inside a box of donated scarves. "You're making a point," Malcolm told him. Alder rested his muzzle on the glove and closed his eyes. Malcolm no longer pretended not to understand. Their bond was not the story of a man rescuing an old dog, nor was it the story of a dog healing a broken veteran through uncomplicated love. Alder was demanding, stubborn, arthritic, and occasionally impossible. Malcolm was not healed. His hand still trembled. His shoulders still hurt. Some nights he woke believing he had forgotten a name on the board. Some mornings he wanted the cabin empty again, simply because solitude required less courage than belonging. But Alder had changed the meaning of strength. The dog had spent years guarding a duty alone because no one else had come to relieve him. Malcolm's gift was not saving Alder from that duty. It was finally showing up for the next shift. In October, Dana found him in the rebuilt office, trying to complete his disability reassessment paperwork. He had filled most of it out himself. The final page asked how his condition affected daily tasks. Malcolm had written one sentence, crossed it out, and written another. Dana read neither without permission. "Need help?" she asked. He looked at the form. "Yes?" She sat beside him. The word no longer sounded like surrender. By early November, North Star received approval for its first full winter season. The news did not produce a celebration so much as a list. Fuel deliveries, volunteer training, snow removal, medical supplies, insurance renewal, emergency bedding. Everett added 3 more items after everyone believed the list was finished. The restored sign was scheduled to go up on the first clear day. Snow came the night before. By morning, the valley shone beneath a bright blue sky. Fresh white covered the motel roof, the parking lot, and the fields beyond. Sunlight caught in the pines and turned every branch to glass. Malcolm stood on a ladder outside the rebuilt office. He wore his olive combat shirt beneath a brown canvas jacket, charcoal work pants, and old leather boots. A carpenter's pencil rested behind his left ear. The restored North Star sign hung above him on temporary supports. Dana held the ladder. Silas supported the far edge of the sign. Everett stood below, examining the hardware with the expression of a man attending a preventable accident. "Those bolts are too short," he said. "They meet the specification," Malcolm replied. "They meet the minimum specification." That is what specifications are for. That is what minimums are for. Regret is free. Helena arrived carrying coffee. Beatrice arrived carrying opinions. Graham arrived late and blamed the rescue vehicle, which he referred to as the old girl, despite the fact that it had started perfectly. Alder sat in the snow wearing his olive-gray thermal coat. His silver muzzle lifted toward the sign. Malcolm positioned the final bolt. His right hand began to shake. The socket slipped once. No one spoke. Months earlier, silence like that would have felt like observation. Now it felt like room. Malcolm lowered the wrench. "Dana, steady the ladder." "I already am." "More." She adjusted her stance. "Silas, lift your side half an inch." Silas did. "Everett, stop breathing judgment at the back of my neck." "I am breathing safety." "Try doing it quieter." Beatrice laughed. Malcolm placed both hands on the wrench. The right one still trembled. The left steadied it. He tightened the bolt slowly until the metal seated against the bracket. The sign held. No miracle passed through his hand. No pain vanished. The North Star simply remained where several people had helped him place it. When Malcolm climbed down, Alder rose with difficulty. Malcolm reached for him automatically, supporting the old dog until his legs found balance. Together, they looked up at the restored silver star. A sedan turned into the driveway. It was old enough to carry rust along the wheel wells. The engine idled unevenly before shutting off. An elderly man stepped out with a thin canvas bag. He wore a dark coat too light for the weather and stood beside the car as if unsure whether approaching the building would create a debt he could not repay. No one rushed him. Beatrice moved behind the front desk. Helena set down the coffee. Dana opened the intake binder. Malcolm walked toward the man with Alder beside him. "Someone told me this was a place to stop for a night," the man said. "It can be. I do not need charity." Malcolm glanced at Beatrice. She looked pleased. "Good," Malcolm said. "We charge one complaint about the coffee." The man looked toward the building. "Do you have room?" Malcolm turned. Behind the glass doors stood Dana, Helena, Graham, Silas, Everett, and Beatrice. People who had disagreed, failed, stayed, returned, and accepted work that could not be completed alone. Alder leaned lightly against Malcolm's leg. Malcolm did not say the motel belonged to him. He did not say they had saved it. He looked at the open entrance beneath the silver star. "The door is still open," he said. Alder stepped forward first, slowly. With the solemn authority of an old watchman beginning one more shift, he led the guest inside. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is not rescuing someone in a single dramatic moment. It is refusing to look away when the world has decided that person is easier to move, label, or forget. North Star was rebuilt because ordinary people chose responsibility over convenience. In our own lives, that choice may be much smaller. A phone call, an open chair, a name remembered, or a door held open a little longer. Tell us what this story meant to you in the comments, and subscribe for more stories about loyalty, courage, and the quiet choices that can change a life. May God give you the wisdom to notice who has been overlooked and the strength to keep the door open when they arrive.